Hi, everyone, and welcome to our next episode of Table Manners for Robots. We continue to forge along with the Unite for Small series. We have a slightly different studio today, and that's only because we're dealing with a bit of load shedding here. So we've had to go and set up a temporary studio for today, and we hope that there will be no technical glitches as a result. If there are a few, please bear with us. We will correct them as quickly as possible. So on that note, let's launch right into today's very important discussion. The impact of COVID, of the post-pandemic workforce, is no more visible than on employees and the plight of employees right now, particularly as we look into the small to medium business sector, which includes some substantial companies. We find that the impact on employees of these organizations are incredibly stark compared to, for example, the very, very large established corporates. On that note, we brought in some experts to really take this discussion apart, really build a robust and valuable conversation for HR professionals to start looking at things differently and bring solutions into the conversation so that we can now prepare for the next generation workforce and not become the adverse effect of a post-pandemic environment. So on that note, I'd like to welcome both of our guests. Let's start with Rizan. Rizan, would you mind telling us a little bit about your background?
Hi, Karushan. Thanks for having me on your show. I'm really excited to be here as part of this Unite for Small movement. And I believe it's really something we need to take seriously, especially in the current economic conditions. So I think well done, and hats off to you and your team for driving this initiative. Just a little bit about myself. I've got a Bachelor of Business Science honors degree in Information Systems and Technology. I started my career as a management consultant at a global management consulting firm, and later expanded my consulting experience into various industries and sectors through business transformation and systems integration projects. Later, I was one of the co-founders of a startup consulting firm, which was later sold to a large technology services corporate. And I think what led me to the startup consulting firm was I was really passionate about creating a different type of a consulting culture and what I call sustainable consulting. You have sustainable energy and you have sustainable farming that looks at creating long-term benefits with minimal effects on the environment. And likewise, I want to do the same for businesses and create long-term benefits or values through the right solutions with minimal impacts on business. And this led me to Mellon Consulting, which was a niche management consulting firm that really had the same beliefs that I believed in. And, I've been there since. I'm currently the managing director of the Consulting and Technology Services Division, but I'm also involved in other exciting, entrepreneurial avenues within the group.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that, Rizan. Shiraz, please tell us a little bit about your background.
Sure, Karushan. And echoing Rizan, thank you very much for having us on the show. I think it's a really exciting topic to discuss today. So I'm kind of the accidental HR guy. I've been involved in the technology industry for about 20 years. For the last 10 years, I've run technology lines of business for some of the big global vendors. My background's been in the tech space, in middleware, business process management, analytics, and big data. But 4 years ago, I joined SAP to kickstart their cloud ERP business, so finance ERP. And after incubating that successfully for 2 years, I was offered the role of running SuccessFactors, which is SAP's human experience management line of business. So it's a very well-established and mature line of business, the most mature cloud business that SAP has, and has a really strong footprint in South Africa. But the opportunity was the growth in the continent. So it's allowed me the opportunity to travel extensively before COVID and meet customers across the continent and understand the needs and the requirements of employees in this very entrepreneurial environment, right? So the real eye-opener for me has been that, understanding the impact of a really engaged and loyal workforce on the objectives of an organization. So for me, what's been an epiphany is that, the real differentiator of any organization is its people. So, that old adage that culture eats strategy for breakfast, for me, is really rung true. So while I'm the accidental HR guy, it's been really fulfilling for me so far.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that very good introduction. Folks, before we move off into the meat of the conversation, a quick note to all the attendees. As you know, with this particular show, Table Manners for Robots, the thing that we encourage is for you as attendees to become part of the dialogue. The way in which you do that is just pop over into the Q&A box inside Zoom, or if you'd like, use the chat box inside Zoom. Send your comments, send your questions through the life of the discussion, and I will ensure that we get to absolutely every comment and absolutely every question will be addressed, as long as you send it during the life of the show and not towards the tail end. So on that note, let's go back to our speakers. Rizan, tell us, what made you specialize in this area?
I think I'm passionate about helping and problem solving, and I'm also passionate about technology. I think the helping bit is definitely something that was instilled in me from my dad, as he was always involved in helping the community, and I think these values naturally got instilled in me. In terms of technology, I think from a young age I was always intrigued about technology. I'm sure, Karushan, you'll remember the IBM 386 and 486 machines back in the day. Sorry if I'm giving away your age here.
Thanks, Rizan. I just want to say thank you. I keep it well hidden, but thank you.
But I would open these machines up, put them together, install new parts. I'd run a 10-meter telephone line, to the built-in modem in the machine, just to hear that famous dial-up sound, and all just to get a 56 kilobit dial-up internet connection. So, I was quite fascinated with technology since then. And I think where business and technology sort of clicked and came together for me was during my major project at university, where we had to develop a solution, a software for a real business, and get a customer to endorse and accept the solution. And we ended up getting a fashion designer as a customer. And despite some very interesting requirements gathering, attending a fashion show, we were able to put a solution together that really addressed the customer's needs and challenges. And it showed that businesses of all sizes, all sorts, including a fashion designer, could use technology to help and create efficiency in business. Helping companies and the employees within companies, finding the right solution is what it's all about, and why I enjoy doing what I do.
Thank you for that, Rizan. Rodney, I got your feedback about my voice being a bit soft. It's clearly a technical issue. I did say at the start that we are going to have a few minor technology issues because we did set up a temporary studio because of load shedding. This isn't normally how we work. I'm going to do my best to fix it as we go through the show. Please keep your feedback coming along. Let me know if you cannot hear me. I'm going to do my best to try super hard to be as audible as possible. And sincere apologies for this technical glitch. Shiraz, let's move over to you. Tell us a little bit about why you got into this specific area.
So I think, from a technology perspective, similar to Rizan, it's a love at an early age for how technology impacts on the consumer. And my first, my first introduction into technology was video games, like many kids, right? And I see my kids doing the same. But I think, as my career progressed, what became important to me was, what really drove me. And what really drove me was starting new businesses, looking at the impact of technology on the consumer and on firms, but really with a view to launching new technologies into the market. So that's been my forte, and that's really been what's driven me. So the opportunity to join SuccessFactors at SAP was really about growth of the continent. And since I hadn't had much experience, it was really interesting. It was an attraction to me to be able to travel to places like Ethiopia and obviously Nigeria and Ghana and so on. So that's been really, really amazing for me.
Thank you for that, Shiraz. Now, while we still have you here, let me just let me just dive right into it. Let's talk about the situation in South Africa right now. What is the plight of employees at this stage?
So I think, if I talk to people that I know, and I'm sure it's similar for everyone, right? There's an overwhelming feeling of anxiety, not just because of COVID, but because of the impacts of it. So, there's a wide range of impact. I mean, from folks who run their own businesses who have seen their businesses grind to a halt, people in the tourism industry or the restaurant industry, for example. And then there are those that have had their salaries cut. So I think there's an overwhelming feeling of insecurity, and which is the underpinning reason for this anxiety, right? So my feeling is that it's incumbent on employers to address the sentiment, to first of all understand the sentiment at a very personal and individual level, and to address it. So they've got to be listening to their employees, and they've got to be forthright where there are potential risks of downsizing an organization, or they've got to be reassuring where there isn't, right? And I think we've seen at SAP, we've seen with dealing with enterprise customers, a lot of that anxiety is translating to real action and fast action. So we recently embarked on a project with a large bank for employee experience, where just like they want to understand what their customers feel about the brand, they want to understand how their employees feel about this forced transition to working remotely. So this forced transformation really puts employers in a difficult situation from two perspectives. One is that they need to ensure that they're managing their talent, so that once the pandemic is over, they hold on to key talent. And the second aspect is that they want to ensure that people are adapting to the new way of working, adopting the tools, and are productive and are engaged. So I think that probably answers your question to a certain extent, but I think we'll build upon it during the rest of the show.
Thank you. And that's right. We will build upon that. I think those are very important opening comments. Folks, again, our guests, attendees of the show, please feel free to put your comments in, put your questions into the dialogue boxes inside Zoom, and I will be sure to make sure that everything is covered during the life of the show. All right. So let's go to Rizan for a second. What, in your opinion, is the biggest problem facing employees of small businesses?
I think the biggest challenge facing is not having a clear understanding of the company's goals and objectives, and that's as a result of companies not having adequate processes, tools in place to support their employees, and as a result, employees that become disengaged.
It looks like,
but I think they're even more.
A few technical difficulties. We're not able to hear Rizan very clearly. I think this may have to do with the fact that Century City is experiencing load shedding right now, and this is possibly affecting the feed. Again, apologies for this. It's a very big coincidence that we actually shoot from Century City in Cape Town, and we have both our studio and our guest Rizan, who's subject to load shedding today. So it's a very big coincidence. This doesn't normally happen this way. Let's just jump to Shiraz for a second, perhaps giving Rizan a little bit of time to figure out his technical issues. So Shiraz, tell us, let's ask a tough question here. Are employees, taking into account the situation post-pandemic, people desperate for jobs, are employees being treated worse today than they have been, say, a year ago?
I think it's hard to answer that in a blanket way. I would answer it from two perspectives. I think there's a truth to that when it comes to blue collar employees, right? Because typically blue collar employees are treated as commodities, unfortunately, and their needs are not always taken into account in the same way as professional services or white collar employees or professional those with professions are. So I think there's two sides to that question. So I think on the one hand, it's probably exacerbated the situation in terms of the negative experience of employees in the blue collar space. But in the white collar space, I think it's probably improved the situation because there's a lot more of a feeling of that we need to look after our staff to ensure that we hold on to the key staff. And there's also a diminishing talent pool, I believe. If you talk to a lot of people, there's a lot of folks who are wanting to leave the country. They believe that the situation is untenable. So I think that there's a real dichotomy in terms of the answer to that question.
Interesting. Very, very interesting. So what would you say are the risks to employers, the actual people risk to employers?
So I think, as I said earlier, if we take into account the bank that I spoke of earlier, we know amongst the big banks that there's a lot of movement. It's very fluid in terms of the war for talent, right? So I think from that perspective, it's really important that, and they understand that it's important that they see their employees, their key staff through this period by supporting them in a way that they feel that there's loyalty towards them in terms of their employees, right? So that they retain key staff throughout this. So I think that's a key feature of what we're seeing amongst professional services, banks, and white collar firms and employers.
Okay, interesting. So just to get an understanding of our audience demographic, if you are either an HR professional or you are yourself a people manager, you lead people, you lead a team, it could be that you just lead a single individual inside your company, please raise your hand or let us know in the Q&A box. Give us some signal that you are a people person. If you are, I'm interested to know, and we just want to get the dialogue going with our audience. So please go ahead and raise your hand, or like I mentioned, just drop a note in one of the boxes. And this way I'm also aware of whether you can hear me or not. That's my way of doing it.
Christian, just another aspect maybe to consider is that many organizations have processes, right? But they're predicated on folks being in the office, so they're very manual processes, right? So in this forced transition, I think one of the aspects that's really been highlighted is that while many organizations struggle to get approvals for HR programs, right, where they institute automation of HR processes, it's becoming understood by the executives that having these processes and these automated systems in place has become really important during these times, right? Because where you can't see your employees face to face, it becomes important, to manage things as simple as leave requests or as complex as performance, management processes. And I think also, providing a digital platform for collaboration provides two, big pieces of value to employers. One is that you help employees to remain engaged, and the second thing is that you create a system of subtle accountability to make sure that people are engaged and productive, and you can understand the contribution of each of the team members to a particular project.
Yeah.
So I think those aspects are important to consider as well.
Absolutely. And I think, Shiraz, to just add to what you're saying, I think, we do sometimes underestimate the importance or the value of person-to-person interaction. Sometimes we take for granted that working alongside someone, we're able to tell, are they having a good day? Are they having a not so good day? Are they in a bad mood? We're able to tell if they're productive or if they're wasting time. We're able to tell what their attitude is towards their work. And all of these things are very subliminal. It's possibly things that we do or that we observe without even realizing that we're picking up all of this wonderful information when we are working on site together as a team. And I think that the push towards remote work, I definitely support it as a tech guy, as someone who is all about being productive wherever one is. I definitely support the notion, but I think sometimes we neglect some of the subtleties that occur in the workplace that makes it so much easier for us to stay in good communication with those around us. And there will be an increased dependence on manual systems to override this or to work around these things that are very native as part of our communication amongst us human beings. We're going to have to find solutions around it. We may have to depend a little bit more on a more formal performance management system if we don't have the luxury of just being able to experience our coworkers. Would you say that that's fair?
I think that's fair, and I think we need to be careful as well to not institute policing measures, right? So we don't want our employees to feel that they're being overly policed because they've been forced to work remotely. So I think the subtlety of creating an environment that's conducive to collaboration is the way to do it, right? Because in that way, a manager can see the contribution of each of the team members to a team task, as an example, and foster a feeling of belonging, of engagement amongst the employees, and potentially picking up the sentiments of those employees that are struggling to work remotely. Because not everyone is built to work in this fashion. People, a lot of people, I speak to a lot of my colleagues who feed off working with people face to face. So those are some of the things that I think we need to take into account as well.
Absolutely. Claire, thank you for raising your hand. You seem to be the only HR professional or people person on the call. I think, my request has fallen on deaf ears, but I want to say a special thank you to Claire for listening to me and heeding to my appeal. Ashraf says this is a very good discussion. Thank you. Thanks for that feedback, Ashraf. Folks, again, attendees, become part of the discussion. The cool thing about Table Manners for Robots is that it allows and we encourage a lot of audience participation. We want you to be part of the discussion. We want you to be asking questions, and we want you to contribute to the live show. So feel free to dialogue and feel free to engage. Let's just check here quickly. Rizan, are you back? And are we live again?
I'm back, Karushan.
Okay.
Apologies for that. seems to be good to go.
All right, no problem. So I know that you were answering the question, what is the biggest problem facing employees of small businesses right now?
Yeah, so I think it talks to, I think, some of the points that Shiraz highlighted now as well, about having employees that are engaged. And the challenges that affects employees, it's a lot more prominent with small businesses, and it's largely because small businesses often lack the right tools, support. We spoke about the performance management systems, having clear day-to-day operating models. Now they've got a lot of manual processes and often these inadequate systems in place that make it difficult for them to manage the HR operations. The pandemic, as we know, it's amplified this challenge. In addition to just highlighting some of the other challenges that Shiraz mentioned earlier, such as employee well-being. For most employees at the moment, I think the biggest challenge is job security. Coupled with the stresses that are inherent in this difficult time. Worrying about the health and well-being of your loved ones, juggling domestic and work responsibilities, all under one roof. Finding food, trying to order online and make sure your deliveries and your groceries are coming through, juggling homeschooling. So, adapting to this new virtual office is a challenge on its own. And it's a bigger challenge when there are no proper systems and digital processes in place to assist employees to adjust to this new way of working.
Absolutely. So while we have you back here, just to cut into the difficult parts of the conversation. So there's a lot of talk about the nicer people stuff and the kind of solutions we need to employ during COVID. But what about the tougher points? What about the difficulties that employees are facing in regards to getting retrenched? Perhaps even getting their salaries cut. A lot of employers are proud about the fact that they are decreasing salaries and not retrenching. What are your thoughts on some of these important points?
That's a good point question raised there, Krushan. I think the COVID pandemic has definitely wreaked havoc on many local businesses. In fact, I read an article in the Times Live over this weekend on a survey of a group of about 2,000 companies, and 76% I think of companies that were surveyed had shrunken revenues, and there were about 23% of companies that have shut down either temporarily and or permanently. The sad reality is that I think there's many more companies that have been impacted, and we have to look at cutting costs in order to survive. Unfortunately, in terms of cost cutting, the largest area of impact was and is likely to be on employment. So a lot of companies have, like you mentioned, looked at salary cuts. Some looked at other options such as taking annual leave or furlough arrangements. I think retrenchment should be the final option, in that the employees and the companies need to work together to find an alternative solution. While these alternative types of measures may not be ideal, they can be workable alternatives to outright retrenchment. At the end of the day, holding on to a job, even in a less than perfect situation, can be more preferable to having no job at all. But ultimately, each company's situation is different, and it depends on what works best for them and their employees. And I think it's the responsibility of the companies, the employers, to consult, have open, transparent, discussions with the employees, and look at the alternatives with the staff together.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. So, a comment here from Candice. Candice says, agreed, Kirushan. Communication during COVID has been a challenge for many companies. I think that many companies have not fully understood the full impact of lockdown on their employees and the challenges they have faced. Many people's personal relationships have been a challenge, and everything has been compounded by homeschooling. And I think that this is a very valid point that needs to come up more and more in the dialogue. There are personal impact or personal consequences to this concept of remote work, and we need to bring up these points into the spotlight a lot more than perhaps we are right now. The soft factors of interpersonal relationships, wanting to have one's colleagues around, wanting to have, a little bit more of the workspace versus combining work and home. All of these have soft impacts on people, and we really need to start dialoguing about it a lot more. Folks, again, I want to encourage you to become part of the conversation and really put your comments, your questions, bring it forward on the Zoom chat, the chat option or the Q&A box. It's up to you. Raise your hand if you'd like to make a comment, and I can enable your voice if you'd like to do it that way. The point of it is that we really want this conversation to be, very robust and very rich. So become part of it. I want to just move on now while we got Rizan and a good connection here. I'm going to just take as much as I can get, Rizan, if you don't mind. In the face of all of these challenges, we are seeing the pressure that a lot of these employees are communicating that were not expected a few months ago. And you mentioned now about you mentioned about some of the cost-cutting measurements that businesses are employing in order to keep their staff on the payroll at all. So there is a definite cost pressure that a lot of businesses are facing. Now, in the face of all of this cost pressure, there's this idea that we need to further invest in systems to improve the employee experience and to improve employee engagement. How does this make sense? Like, how is it that I should invest at a time when I'm trying to save money and I'm trying to keep people on my payroll? This is for Rizan, by the way.
I think that's a very good question, Kadushan, and it's so pertinent right now. Companies are looking at cutting costs, and they're cutting salaries down, and now you're asking them to go invest in technology and solutions, which comes at a cost as well, and that's a difficult sell to have and a difficult conversation to have internally in organizations. But I think there's different views on this. Studies have shown that businesses that often experience HR problems, as a result, they lose their competitive advantage. And we know that, employees are an indispensable component of, the success of a business, and therefore shouldn't be ignored. The reality is that many businesses neglect the HR aspect of their business in varying degrees. Some businesses, especially small businesses, they view HR practices as, costly, time-consuming, and it often, typically leads them to start adopting informal HR practices, manual processes, having inadequate systems, and they're therefore poorly equipped to manage the operation and challenges that are related from an HR perspective. And ultimately, this can cost the business. What's the implications of not having the right tools in place to support your employees? Amongst other things, you could have high staff turnover, low morale, lack of skills, reduced motivation, and ultimately, it can affect productivity. So, rather than thinking about the cost of, bolstering HR capabilities, I think companies need to start thinking about the cost of not making this investment. There's also a big misconception that, HR software or solutions nowadays are very expensive. They're complex. A company has to implement this full suite of HR capabilities. It's going to take, 9 to 12 months to implement, and companies don't really want to do that. The reality is that there are really good solutions out there that are inexpensive due to technological advancements in cloud computing. You've got subscription-based models that really make it affordable. Furthermore, companies no longer need to invest in a full suite of capabilities that's not needed, and they can focus on key capabilities that also make it more affordable for the company. Through best practice methodologies, business processes built into these solutions, we're seeing that implementation cycles are much shorter, and we're seeing solutions being completed within 8 weeks, depending on the capability. Ultimately, you need to identify the challenges or the pain points in the business and see, which areas can be focused on and where you can gain efficiencies. if you put the right HR system or solution in place, it will slash overhead costs. It's going to increase productivity. It's going to boost your employee efficiency. I think better yet, it will create a happier, more efficient employee. This in turn can translate into better customer experiences and ultimately, increase profits, which is what the organizations are looking for. Investing the right technology now, it's equivalent to investing, long term in your people and in their career growth, and also in the business itself. So if you commit to this type of investment, amidst this current crisis or future challenges, the benefits of this are going to be paid several times over through dedication and performance of from your employees. That they'll give back to the organization when things get back to normal. Yeah. I just want to add another last point here that it's possible to operate your organization virtually without any software, but it's tough. Businesses that focus on creating operational efficiencies, they can drive further competitiveness while also creating increased capacity in the organization. And we're seeing now, once we introduce now the pandemic that's coming to play now, remote working, that's also having a significant impact on your HR related processes and your HR teams. The burden has fallen. I think now through the pandemic, we're seeing that a lot of the burden is falling now onto the HR team and professionals. And without having modern HR software that is cloud-based, that can be accessed, anywhere on any device, you're going to find that the efforts to successfully work remotely is going to be hampered by the lack of technology. Just for example, taking an HR system with mobile app capabilities and having self-service capabilities, that alone is going to improve the efficiencies in the business. It's going to remove the bottlenecks. It's going to create a better, working environment. And ultimately, that will create efficiencies in the business and drive productivity.
Rizan, if I may add, Christian, I think I agree with what you're saying completely, right? But playing devil's advocate, these conversations tend to fall on deaf ears in the current environment where many executives will say to you, but those things are fluffy and they're nice to have, right? So I think we've got to turn the conversation into one of what is the consequence of you not doing anything right now, right? The COVID horizon is medium term at best. There's going to be an upturn. If organizations choose to remain where they are and try and sit it out and they don't cater for the future, they have a very real risk of becoming redundant, right? Let's just take, for example, my 13-year-old kid, right? I can tell you right now that when I can relate back to a job I started in 2006 where for the first 3 days I was given manuals to read. And I can tell you right now that my 13-year-old would walk out of that organization within half an hour because of the poor experience that he's had, right? Being used to a consumer-based environment that is real-time, that fulfills his needs, that is contextual to his particular needs. So that's one aspect of it, right? The other aspect is that what we're seeing at SAP is that, we're having to really because HR is seen as nice to have by many older executives, and I say that reservedly, without any negativity, is that, we're having to prove the real returns on investment. So I'll give you a quick example. We've embarked on projects with two major banks on the continent recently, and both of them, freed up the money or approved the money to fund these projects based on two things. The first thing was that we showed them what a reduction in time to productivity would mean. So both banks, have a large complement of staff that are revenue generating. So these are guys that sell loans. So we showed that an impact of reducing the time to productivity by 20% would mean a real return on investment in terms of these guys being able to generate revenue much sooner than anticipated, right? And that business case paid for the investment, right? And you kind of see the light switch on with the CFO and with the executive immediately. So that's one aspect. The other aspect is that if we look at I'll just quote a couple of quick statistics. The IDC says that organizations that focus on overall employee engagement deliver 3 times more revenue per employee, right? And organizations that focus on employee experience have 40% lower employee turnover than the average organization. Now, you'll agree that these types of things are, easily quantifiable in terms of the cost to the organization or the return on investment for an organization. So I think we need to turn these conversations into something that is meaningful and empirical for the individuals based on their KPIs and objectives. And we need to show them, the opportunity cost that's lost for them not doing something.
I agree completely.
I think spot on.
Guys, I'm just gonna ask to just come back very strongly here, because we all, I'm also managing quite a number of questions, so I don't want the conversation to just run away. So respectfully, I really do appreciate all of your very enthusiastic conversation there, but I do need to make sure that we're getting around to all of the questions coming through as well. So if you wouldn't mind just handing back over to me every now and then. All right. So the first thing I want to just go ahead here and say is we've got a question from Anonymous. Where can we find the recordings of these webinars? You can go to tablemannersforrobots.com. I want to just link back to the overall theme of both the answers that we got. Very, very strong words, very powerful dose of good quality information, very insightful. I love the aspect of don't just look at the cost of doing something, look at the cost of not doing something. And I think in the current state of business, with remote work, with businesses turning off some of their production lines, businesses changing their facilities from one to another, we're just experiencing so much change right now that we need to be a little bit more open to some of the hidden costs that we are not observing. So it's very vital to start quantifying and evaluating the cost of not taking action, which in my opinion at this stage is far more severe than the cost of taking action. All right, let's just see what we getting coming through here. Mitchell has a question. Would it be fair for employees to expect improved salaries in the case of a company being 100% operational during this pandemic and who keeps a suitable profit margin? So I'm just going to go ahead and give you my knee-jerk reaction to this question. Then I'll probably hand over to a speaker. My thoughts on this is that if the company is doing well, and if the employee in particular is doing well, that employee must be rewarded. If the numbers are going up, it doesn't matter what's happening in the environment, that person must be rewarded. That's a philosophy that I live by and I swear by. And I think that if a company does it the other way around, they will suffer their own demise very rapidly. So if a company is doing well, if the employee is doing well, and if they're not rewarded despite the environment, then the company will inevitably wind up in the soup at some point, imminently. So that's my thought. I don't know. Razan, do you want to give a comment on that perhaps?
100%. I agree with your points as well, Karushan. I think, I mentioned earlier about, having an engaged workforce and, the impact of having a disengaged employee. And this talks to that very same point. If an employee is performing well and the company is performing well, they need to be rewarded, and this will create this engaged workforce, the passion within the employee that's going to benefit the company in the long run. So I again just agree with your points as well on that.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks for that. Folks, we just passed the halfway mark of the show. I'm going to invite you to click the link and start completing your surveys. It's very important that you complete these surveys. This is our primary source of information about your experience on the show, what you're looking for, whether you'd like further engagement, whether you'd like to dialogue with the speakers on the show here on after. Your vehicle to talk or to make requests is via the survey link. We'll have it put into the chat box. So if you wouldn't mind just clicking that link and taking a second to give us your feedback. So I'm going to continue with the conversation. We're really getting into some nice golden nuggets here. I'm going to just read out some comments that are coming through, guys. So Claire says, would definitely agree with that. There seems to be more soft factors than ever. While the impact of COVID-19 is strong on businesses, it is equally strong on the personal lives of the employees. I've noticed with ex-colleagues and friends, remote micromanaging is rife at some employers that have continued operating at some level during COVID-19, even when there is not a lot of work to be done. It's almost like micromanaging availability rather than productivity. And on that, I'd like perhaps to extend this a little bit further with you, Shiraz. Maybe just give a quick thought on the difference between, micromanaging availability as opposed to focusing on employee production and productivity and bringing out the best in the employee.
Absolutely. I think we can all empathize or think back to the start of the pandemic where we were working remotely and there was just this, proliferation of calls because people seem to want to prove through meetings that they are productive and unnecessarily so. I'm seeing that has been alleviated within, my organization. And I think it stems from an understanding and, kind of a dissemination of information amongst the employees and from the management and leadership to understand, the challenges that people are facing. So, for example, I have my best salesperson, has to homeschool her kids, right? Because they have, they have some illnesses and so on, so they're not getting back to school. So, for example, from between 10 and 1 in the morning or 10 and 1 in the early afternoon, she's not available. So we work around that. So, as a kind of an unspoken rule within SAP, we have these little pockets of understanding that we promote, and we are focusing on outcomes rather than, as you're saying, the availability. So I think, again, I'm going to go back to the fact that we need to foster a culture of involvement, of engagement, and of collaboration, but also one of understanding, and steer away from that policing, because that is the most negative thing, and I think that is going to result in people leaving organizations post the pandemic.
Absolutely. I tend to agree with that. And I think that we need to revisit our view on how we employ systems. When we're introducing systems, it's not about tracking or audit trails for the sake of audit trails. It's really about bringing out the best in the individual. And that's something, if you look at the content on Kirution.com, if you look at our YouTube channel, we really put out a lot of videos and content on the subject. We believe that the purpose of technology is to bring out the best in the human being. We want to move the mundane tasks into the world of the computer, things like tracking and logging and data capturing. We want to move that into the world of the computer. And what we want to do is we want to leave the human being free to do that which only he can do. And that's bringing his creative flair, bringing his ingenuity, bringing his design skills, bringing his artistic abilities, his ability to persuade and influence. All of these are the things that we want to enable in the human being, as opposed to making the human being just do yet another software task. All right.
So I think. Yeah, sorry. Just a quick note is that, in terms of, I think it's got to do with the maturity of leadership as well, right? Because the anxiety creates this need to micromanage. I think it starts with leadership, and I think there needs to be some kind of change management that helps leaders to manage the output of their workforce.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely agreed. So I just want to go to a comment here by Peace. Peace says that for small businesses and other small organizations, is it necessary to cut off basic salaries to employees in this time of need? If so, what are the best solutions to show great support to employees in this or in this time of need and all the negative impact of COVID-19? So I would like to get quick comments from both of our speakers on this question. Rizan, I know that you have talked about this concept of salaries and salary cuts, but if you could just maybe comment on the fact on this point about eliminating basic salaries already, and then we will go to Shiraz. Rizan?
Yeah, I think as I mentioned earlier, there's various approaches that one can look here, and different alternatives. Ultimately, organizations are trying to cut costs in order to stay afloat and to survive. Apart from cutting salaries, some of the other measures, like I mentioned before, are having employees to take their annual leave. Because a lot of companies see that through the pandemic, December period is going to be they would need to continue working during that time, just to keep the operations going. And then other options such as furlough arrangements, which is temporary leave of absence. So these are some of the other options that can be looked at. But again, the point is these discussions need to be held together. The employee and the employee to sit down and understand, how do they make this work? The company needs to operate, it needs to survive. And what other options can there be? Where else can you cut costs in order to not impact the employee?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Very, very valid points that are coming up here. So, folks, as we edge towards the last 15 minutes of the show, I want to encourage us, everyone, to just put in your pertinent questions and comments, and I will do my best to take them all up on the show with our speakers. I also have a few more questions that I'd like us to run through very quickly in a very punchy way. Again, a reminder to please click on the link and complete a survey so you let us know what you're experiencing as we do the show, and we can learn from your feedback and from your experiences with us this morning. It's going to be just a few seconds for you to click that link and complete your survey as we head out to the close of the show. We have a comment here from Claire. Claire addresses this to Mitchell. She says, I would agree with that. While there's still much uncertainty and some caution is needed, some employers could be using COVID-19 as an excuse for not improving remuneration. And definitely, it's not the first time that I've heard this comment being made, and it is an interesting one. And I definitely would love for that answer or that comment to be unpacked a little bit more as we go through the answers to the next few questions here. Shiraz, if we could just jump to the point of loyalty. Obviously, this is a time of difficulty for both the employer and the employee. Certainly, a number of challenges, new people challenges facing employees that we never deemed possible even a year ago. What is the role of loyalty in all of this?
So I think a lot's been said about reward and in organizations that are doing well and the potential to cut salaries. I think there's a reality here that in an already contracting economy, we now have this pandemic which will see us contracting by 8% in the next financial year, right? So I think that the loyalty that I would expect as an employee would be that if my company was doing well, but they explained to me that in order to survive, there wouldn't be salary increases, but there would be other forms of assistance in terms of helping me to rearrange, debt, for example, or working with financial advisors to restructure my investments, that these things would be helpful. And I think that would show loyalty towards me in terms of taking care of me as an individual. So loyalty is not always about increased remuneration and reward. It's also about understanding my specific situation and helping me to fight that battle. So if, I know folks that have had their salaries cut by 30%, but some organizations have helped them to restructure their debt so that they could cope with that. And they put in place other measures to help them to alleviate some of the spending that they see. So I think loyalty is really a two-way street.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting, and definitely a two-way street. And I don't think that there's ever been a time where we've experienced this much change in such a short space of time. And it's really, really put the concept of loyalty to test, both not just from an employer-employee relationship point of view, but also in terms of customers. And it's really tested customer loyalty at this time. Very interesting points that you raised there. So while we've got you here going and the juices are flowing, tell us about workflow. Let's go to that level inside the organization. What are some of the people management workflows that we're going to have to start thinking differently about inside the remote work environment?
So I think, in normal times, not having automated systems results in, an inconsistent management system, right? So you have some managers that are really great with people, and an onboarding process, for example, is really rewarding to a new staff member, and others are not so good at it, or their interpersonal skills are not strong enough. So even take COVID out of the equation, I think the automation of processes results in a consistent management system, which means that every employee is entitled to the same way in terms of how they perceive the organization treating them, right? So I think it's really, really important that you create a consistency in terms of how you manage people, so that there's no favoritism. We use our own software. So, for example, when we look at things like salary increases and performance bonuses and the like, it goes through a peer review system. It goes through, if I'm looking at salary increases for my employees, the system enables a peer review from managers at my level, so that we make sure that the process is fair, so that everyone within the organizations has full transparency into the process. There's no feeling that there's favoritism and so on. So I think, maybe that example answers your question, that even without COVID, there's a real need for consistent management system, which is only achievable through automating processes and a real, value added HR system.
Yeah, and Shiraz, I just want to challenge you a little bit here.
Sure.
I want to just probe a little bit more into this point that you raised. A lot of businesses are they're wary about trying the avant-garde, especially at this time of change where so much has changed around the business. The customers have changed, the products have changed. We've had to pivot so many things. And especially, if you're a slightly smaller business, you're not this huge mammoth global conglomerate, you tend to think that certain aspects like peer reviews, it's just very avant-garde. It's a little bit unnecessary. If you could just tell us, what are the risks facing some of these businesses that either believe that it's too new, or possibly believe that's for the big guys, it's not for us? What are your thoughts on that?
So I think it's got to do with context, right? We've got to understand the context of the organization and the culture of the organization to understand what will work for them. So the peer review does not necessarily work in every organization, right? But if we look to further the aims of an organization, so if we tap into the key objectives of an organization, every organization, for example, will have the objective to improve staff turnover, right? So how do we do that? And what is the cost of staff turnover? So I would take the questions to a very basic level in terms of what is the cost of not doing something, and what is the potential return if you change, a particular area of your business that is experiencing pain, right? Because, for example, staff turnover is probably the easiest example that you can use. When you lose a staff member, it's not only a case of you not having a staff member on board for 2 or 3 months, but it's a case of losing 6 months in terms of training the next staff member. It's the collateral damage of losing key relationships between that staff member and your customers, and the impact on the customer service, and the resulting impact on your ability to derive revenue. So I think that those are the ways that I would answer that question. And it goes back to my earlier point about what is the cost of doing nothing. Those are always the questions that we need to have. So it's not a case of, a lot of organizations will say, we're not going to transform. What is the use of transforming? And that's the level of detail that I would get to in terms of answering that question.
That absolutely makes sense. So we do have a question from Anonymous. How does labor law cater for pandemic situations? Just at a high level, I just want to stress that we definitely don't have any official prescriptive guidance from a labor law perspective on today's show. So I just want to make that very clear. I don't know. Rizan, do you want to give that a bash? Do you know anything about labor law in regards to catering for the current pandemic situation?
Yeah, I think, like you mentioned, there hasn't been anything that's been prescriptive or legislated to date. But I think, the changes in the environment and the new ways of working, could introduce some of these changes. I just read, recently that, Minister Dlamini Zuma has also indicated in the government gazette and introduced new or additional components from a working condition perspective that need to be introduced into organizations, such as flexible time, shift working, the number of people that can be in the physical workspace and therefore have to work in these different shifts. So these are the things I think could become the norm, and we'll have to wait and see how these things unfold.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with the sentiments there. Very interesting about basic conditions of employment. If you really think about where those pieces of legislation emerged, it was really about bringing a sense of safety and comfort for employees inside the context of the workplace. And now, obviously, the nature of the workplace has fundamentally changed, so it will have bearing on legislation. Very interesting points. I don't think any of these points are necessarily conclusive at this stage, but really, really good to just start thinking about how this is going to affect us in the next 3 to 5 years. All right. So Rizan, while we got you going there, tell us, in terms of technology, I get the sense, and I myself lead a company that isn't a big company. We're a small company, and I'm interested to know, what are those, from a tech point of view, what are those bare bones, the bare minimum that I need to do? I don't want to be scared by a long laundry list of things that I'm not going to afford at this immediate stage. What would you say are some of the bare minimum things that I need to have in place to successfully steer my ship?
Yeah, I think you need to have robust sort of solutions in place that allow you to adapt to this new ways of working. It's essential that organizations are able to respond rapidly, to keep the business as usual processes on track as far as possible. Whether your people are working from home or, in the usual workplace, they still need to be paid. I think this is where you need a really good, a robust payroll system, because organizations that have outdated payroll solutions are going to struggle to complete their pay runs on time, and make it a lot more difficult for employees who are already feeling the pinch in some organizations. So as a minimum, I think that's what's needed, and there are other sort of capabilities that I think is also needed, especially if we look at the remote working situation. Having a well-integrated, intuitive time tracking software. I think it's one of the most essential tools that you're going to need for remote work. Keeping employees accountable for their breaks, their time, and it needs to be easy enough for them to use, and simple as operating a mobile phone. We need to have, I think, these simple solutions in place that make it easier for organizations to operate, for employees to utilize, without hindering their performance at work.
Yeah, very, very good points there. So, obviously the few things in life that we know don't change is taxes and the fact that we have bills. So I think we definitely need to find ways to make sure that whole process is managed better, especially as a lot of companies go through a bit of difficulty in terms of, keeping the books in balance. It's going to be important to be very systematic about things and to have the right level of transparency and visibility. Love your advice there about time tracking and making it as easy as possible. And I'm sure that there are all sorts of other productivity enhancements that come with these tools. All right. So, as we head towards the close of the show, again, another appeal and invitation to all of you to please take a second. We've made the feedback form super quick and easy. It's just a quick it's a set of drop downs, so it'll take you only a few seconds to complete. While you guys do that, I'm going to ask Shiraz to just tell us, from a legislative and compliance point of view, are there any worries that we need to, not neglect in regards to this new post-pandemic workforce?
I think you guys touched on it a little bit, but I think that, again, I separated this into the white collar and the blue collar. From a blue collar perspective, an essential workforce perspective, I think the most important thing is health and safety, making sure that we adhere to the rules set out, and that there are safety protocols in place to prevent the workforce from the risk of COVID. And then from a white collar perspective, I think it's the support mechanisms to enable staff to adapt to the new way of working and to adopt the new tools, and to to be given some comfort that they're being managed through this process.
Okay, cool. Well, on that note, I want to say we do have a whole bunch of questions that we weren't able to get to, unfortunately, because of time. But I do invite you to complete the survey feedback forms, and in doing so, it will give you the opportunity to continue the dialogue with our speakers. We can set that up for you. We can make those arrangements, so that if you do have any questions that we weren't able to get to today, that we will still be able to continue the dialogue into the future. I want to thank our speakers for showing up, and despite the constraints of load shedding and some of our typical South African difficulties, that we still managed to pull off a show, which is really fantastic, and it really shows this power of this human spirit that we possess as South Africans. And I really loved that part of the conversation. I really loved the people aspect of today's discussion. It's all about bringing out the best in our people, and it's not just about trying to extract value mechanically from people. It's really about thinking about the soft issues at this stage. So lots of golden nuggets that have come out in today's show. Very big thank you to all of you who showed up on the show as delegates and attendees and who have participated actively. Your thoughts and your feedback really does make the show what it is. On that note, thank you so much, and we will catch you next week for another installment of Table Manners for Robots. Thank you very much.